Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 925B, and today's date is March 22nd, 2016, and the title of the episode is, It Has Begun, the Plan is in Motion. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, in past reports, we talked about the FBI and Apple, and how the FBI was suing Apple to give them the key to the castle. They wanted the ability to access everyone's iPhones. And we know that John McAfee came out and said, I don't know why the FBI is going through all this. It's very easy to unlock the iPhone. All they need to do, if they have the physical phone, is to take it apart. You need a hardware developer, a software developer, and you can find the information very easily. And he demonstrated this. Now, all of a sudden, the FBI has kind of put the encryption showdown on hold with Apple. They're saying there's this mysterious third party who is willing to show the FBI on how to unlock the San Bernardino iPhone. So right now, the U.S. government is going to cancel tomorrow's showdown with Apple. They filed a motion to vacate the hearing. And the question is, who's going to show them this? Is this going to be John McAfee? Is it another group? Well, what we do know is that the FBI always knew how to unlock the cell phone if they had the physical device. This whole entire thing was a show to try to get the keys to the castle. Now, the question is, did Apple and the FBI, did they make some type of an agreement behind the scenes saying, okay, here's the access. Let's pretend that you have this other way of doing it and we all can leave happily, and everyone thinks that Apple has kept their promise of security and the FBI is finding out how to do this. Well, we know for one that the FBI, if they have the physical phone, they already knew how to do this. Two, Apple in the past has worked with the FBI and other agencies and gave them access. Three, Apple has a credibility issue with the public, and they need to make sure that the people understand that their information is secure. The question is it really secure? Well, they're telling us it is. The thing is, how do we know? We really don't. But the whole thing was completely ginned up to make us believe that terrorists are using encryption, and this is why we need to give up our rights. Well, if a terrorist, and I've said this many times before, if there are truly terrorists or criminals, and they're going to commit a terrorist act or a crime, guess what? They're not going to be using Facebook, Twitter, their everyday phones. First, they'll create their own encryption method, which the FBI cannot access anyhow. Second, they will use other methods of communication. Now, the New York Times ran an article about how the attackers in Paris most likely used encryption. Well, we know this was a false flag. We know these were certain agencies helping this along. And these agencies are not going to be using Facebook to communicate with each other. They're not going to be using Twitter. So they come to find out that they used cell phones, burner phones, and they just chucked them afterwards. And there was no encryption involved whatsoever. So we can see at this point, everything the U.S. government, central bankers are telling us is a complete lie. It's all being used to make you think you are unsafe, that you need to be spied on. But the whole thing's an illusion, just like everything else they're telling us. Now, the Pentagon is going to be opening up a $200 million intelligence center in Britain, which would act as the headquarters for all U.S. military data in Europe and Africa. This is known as the Joint Intelligence Analysis Center. The facility will be located at the RAF Croton, a U.S. Air Force base near Milton Keynes, which already processes about a third of the U.S. military communications in Europe. So we can see that the U.S. is spreading out its spying apparatus. And at this point, they're very nervous about other countries. They're nervous about the people. We see other countries now implementing draconian laws, spying on their own people, because they're very nervous about what is happening, because they need to be prepared for when this economy completely collapses. And their main focus is to spy on public officials, judges, and the people, to keep everyone accounted for, to make sure no one is threatening their authority, and to understand which groups they need to go after when things go down. Now, out in Ukraine, we see things really starting to move along here. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter explains that the United States is providing Ukraine training both against what you might call symmetrical or traditional kinds of combat operations, and also helping them with this unique brand of hybrid warfare. The United States is concluding its most effective round of training to Ukrainian armed forces, and we see that they're training the Ukrainian forces to go up against the Russian forces. Very interesting. Ukraine's military is going to call up about 10,000 men and seek volunteers to replace some of the other soldiers who are due to return home from the contact line. And we know since the ceasefire was implemented in February 2015, there really is no ceasefire. The battle is continuing. And right now, Ukrainian men have to do at least 1 year of military service and can then be called up to fight until they reach the age of 60. Since the coup d'etat, there's been around 9,000 civilians that have died in Ukraine. So the economy has completely collapsed. The country is split. There is war inside the country. And thousands of people have died. This is what the United States did to Ukraine. We see China right now is expanding their security reach in Central Asia. Beijing has proposed a joint counterterrorism mechanism with Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Tajikistan as a project to boost the regional security. This initiative is a clear signal that China is seeking to become more involved in security issues beyond its borders. They're protecting themselves. These countries realize what the U.S. government central bankers are after. They're after war to cover up this entire economic collapse. And they're pushing this as hard as they possibly can. This is why China, Russia, every time NATO, the United States, makes a move, they counter it to defend themselves. When the United States went in the Pacific, set up missile bases, made deals with the Philippines, trying to get a new base in Japan to bring in more advanced weapons, China decided, okay, we see what's happening here, because the president came out and said we're encircling China. They decided to set up defensive weapons. Same thing with Russia. As they set up the missile shield, as they brought more troops into the Baltic, to the Black Sea, stored weaponry, newer weaponry in caves in Norway, Russia said, okay, we see what's happening here. And they set up defensive measures. Not offensive, but defensive. And in some cases, yes, offensive. But mostly, they're doing it right after the U.S. and NATO does it. And this is what I talk about, the bully poking. The U.S., NATO, continually poke, and they're trying to get these countries to do something. Just like the fake hydrogen bomb that North Korea allegedly exploded. Of course, there's no evidence of this. All of a sudden, we saw South Korea and the U.S. talking about the THAAD system that they were going to place in South Korea. They increased the military budget. The whole thing is a show that is being put on to make you believe that all these countries are getting ready to attack the United States. Now, Russia, they are going to equip their military jets, the Su-34 strike fighters. They're going to be equipped with sophisticated Kabini electronic countermeasures. Now, the Kabini system provides individual aircraft with protection against enemy fighters, missile attacks, and ground-based air defense systems. And we see, compared to the United States and the F-35 and the weaponry that the United States has, most of it is in poor shape. A lot of it's old. And we see with the F-35, they're having a huge amount of trouble with it. The radar systems don't work. The helmet really doesn't work that well. And we know that it was in a dogfight with the older F-16 fighter jets, and it lost to the older jets. And at this point, we're starting to see that the U.S. is not really equipped to go to war. We're hearing from a lot of generals in the military saying that we don't have the proper military equipment. The soldiers are run down. We cannot really go into another war. But the United States government central bankers, they don't care. Their agenda is to push war. Now, out in Japan, there are 2 British ships that arrived there to transport about 730 pounds of plutonium to the U.S. That is enough to make about 50 nuclear bombs. The ships, which are operated by Pacific Nuclear Transport, will transport the cargo to the Savannah River site, U.S. government facility in South Carolina. And we know that Obama has ordered the nuclear arsenal updated, and we can see that they've launched some Trident missiles in the past to give warnings to China and Russia. And at this point, it seems that they're getting prepared and ready for war. I mean, if the U.S. is losing in this next great war, the U.S. government central bankers will resort to nuclear weapons. No doubt about it. Now, out in Tunisia, it looks like they're extending their state of emergency for 3 more months. We realize that the U.S. government central bankers, UK, Israel, the coalition forces, they need to get into Libya. We understand UK has troops on the ground in Tunisia. Everything is standing by. They're trying to get that unity government into Tripoli, and this is where the problem is. They're continually trying, and they are continually pushing their way into this. Now, we understand that Turkey, they are fighting the Kurds. This is the poster child of the new enemy in Turkey. We see that they are cracking down on the Kurdish population. There are curfews everywhere, and we're noticing that the French MEP, they have a lot of questions for Turkey, because Turkey must explain why they're killing civilians and infants, because they're saying infants can't be terrorists. So what are they doing at this point? And they want a complete investigation in what is going on inside of Turkey. Well, we know that Erdogan is now going off the deep end. He's a dictator, does not want freedom of the press. And the U.S. is staying completely silent about all of this. We see out in Iraq, a previously secret U.S. military fire base in Iraq has been attacked. And this was a complete secret until this came out. And of course they said, well, we were going to let everyone know that we have this there. And we see more troops are heading in, because the troops on the ground, the advisors, want to call them advisors, but they're really combat troops, they're being attacked. So they're using this as an excuse to bring more combat troops into Iraq and then eventually filter into Syria. Now, we see that Moscow, they've been asking the United States to work with them about the ceasefire violations. And Russia is saying that the U.S. is not answering. They're not working with them. And Russia is saying that they might employ military forces against groups that systematically violate the truce and what the U.S. and Russia agreed upon. And this is part of the deal. Now, I think the U.S. wants this to happen. They want Russia to step in. They want Russia to get involved once again, so they can start this war. It doesn't help them that they remove their ground troops, that they're just going after the Islamic State with air bombings. They want the battle. They want the war. And we can see right now, U.S. Defense said Any unilateral Russian action to respond to a ceasefire violation is unacceptable and runs counter to the spirit of cessation of hostilities agreement. Well, actually, it's in there. But Russia said they're not going to go after any group unless they have received verifiable proof that they are continually violating the agreement. Now, of course, they're going to be going after the moderate rebels because the agreement doesn't include the Islamic State, does not include Al-Qaeda, does not include al-Nusra or any other terrorist organization. So the only group that's left is the moderate rebels. Now, Russia is bombing the Islamic State all over eastern Syria. They are hitting them hard in Homs, in Hama, in Deir ez-Zor, in Aleppo, in Palmyra, all over the place. They're killing the terrorists, and Islamic State is losing ground. This is why the United States right now, the central bankers, Israel, UK, the coalition forces, are pushing as hard as they can to get something going here. Now, we realize that Turkey has started out with these false flags. They said it was the Kurds again, and then the latest one was the Islamic State. And we see that Turkey has been shutting down different towns, putting in curfews, killing different people, putting them in jail, shutting down the press, shutting down social media. Erdogan is basically a dictator now in the country. And the U.S. says what? Nothing. So right now, the U.S. Department of State said that the Obama administration will deepen security ties with Turkey this week when a U.S. interagency delegation visits Ankara for talks about what's going on there. Now, do you think it's about, hey, calm the situation down, stop being such a bad dictator? No. They're going there to talk about the next phase of their plan. They're talking about going into Syria. They're talking about more false flags. And we see already that they're setting everything up. The FBI is adding 2 Syrian nationals to the cyber most wanted list because they're part of the Syrian Electronic Army, and they are in Syria, and they have the ability to cyber attack America. So now they have added them to the list. They are the most wanted. Now think about what they're doing here. They're preparing and getting everyone ready for what's coming down the line. Now, we saw out in Belgium, we saw what happened there. It was an explosion in an airport, in a metro center. And as soon as it happened, we can see how messed up this is. Ukrainian Security Service came out and said it was Moscow. They were involved in the terror attacks in the capital, which is Brussels, which is absolutely ridiculous. Why in the world? What would be their motive in doing this? Well, we know it wasn't them. And what's very interesting about all of this, less than a week before the terrorist attacks in Brussels, President Erdogan warned of a possible bombing in European cities, including Brussels. And he said there is no reason why the bomb that exploded in Ankara could not explode in Brussels or any other European city. And he said this during a ceremony on March 18th. So it's very interesting at this point. Now, we know the Islamic State, they have claimed responsibility for the attack via an affiliated propaganda channel. And what is going on here? Well, they're trying to get Europe involved in Syria. They're trying to push the agenda forward. They've already found the Islamic State, a flag and a bomb in a house in Brussels district. They found chemical weapons. It was all set up perfectly. Everything was there that they needed. They found this very quickly. They even have photographs of the alleged bombers. Everything is set up. They knew everything in an instant. Didn't waste any time getting the information. Of course, they had no knowledge of this. So all this security and all this spying and everything they're doing, if you believe the official story, is a waste of time. And we know what all the spying is about. It's not spying and looking for terrorists. It's spying on the people. Now, the world leaders have spoken out against the terrorist attack in Brussels, and they're saying that Europe is at war right now. And they're worried there's going to be more of this. Now, we've been talking about these false flags, and I think just yesterday I said there's going to be many more of these false flags in Turkey than throughout Europe, and we're starting to see it because the U.S. at this point, their backs are against the wall. UK, Israel, the coalition forces, they need to do something to create this event, this urgency to go into Syria. Think about it. Why was Ashton Carter, during the ceasefire peace talks, going around to all the countries, trying to get more troops, more military assets involved in fighting the Islamic State, when they had 18 months prior to this? Now, the Islamic State was being beaten by Russia and Syria. They were losing. Why do you need more troops right now? Russia proved you don't need that much. What was the reason for them going around? Because we know at this point, the U.S., UK, Israel, the coalition forces, their objective is not to go after the Islamic State. That is their proxy army. So right now we know the FBI is going to be coordinating with Belgium, of course, hiding any evidence that comes out. They don't want anyone to know. Because anytime there's a false flag, the FBI just magically gets involved with it. And we see right now that we're going to see more of these false flags. Now, here in the United States, we see that security is going to be tightened at all airports, rail stations, ports. DHS is going to come out with what they're going to do. We're going to see a lot of different laws being changed all around Europe. We're going to see more boots on the ground. But the whole thing really doesn't make any sense, because think about this for a second. In Syria, the Islamic State is being hit by Russia. They're continually bombing. They destroyed the oil convoys, which we know that Turkey was involved with, Erdogan's son, to pay for their covert operations. We know that the Tiger forces in Syria are liberating town after town after town. That the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, they're not part of the ceasefire peace talks. They're not included in this, so Russia is continually bombing. But the Islamic State decides to bomb Belgium? Does that make any sense to anyone? Why would the Islamic State go to Belgium? Why? Because they captured the fake patsy, a couple days before this occurred, that was implicated in the Paris attacks? Well, they used that to say this is why the false flag occurred. But why wouldn't there be an attack on Russia? Why would they go to Belgium? It makes no sense. So we can see the ceasefire talks, they're a stall tactic. Borders now will be closed to keep capital moving from one country to another because the entire economy is falling apart. Throughout Europe, the United States, all the private West Central Bank countries. Europe now needs to rally behind Turkey and the U.S. to go into Syria. The U.S. is sending a team over to Ankara, Turkey, to talk about details about what their next move is going to be. We see there are going to be more troops, military assets on the ground in each one of these countries. The U.S. is going to ask Europe for more troops and more military assets for Syria to fight the Islamic State. They're scaring the public. They're using the fear factor to create more draconian laws, take away our rights, making each one of these countries into a police state. And they're setting this up for more false flags. Remember, their plan is to start war. Their plan is not peace. It's not the ceasefire. It's not to talk with Assad and make a deal. Their agenda has always been the same. And we can see their plan is in motion right now. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.